Ladies and gentlemen, moderating this fascinating session from the Ministry of External Affairs, I hand the session over to Mr. Santosh Jha.
Thank you. Welcome to the penultimate session. We've spent the entire day talking about partnerships. Now the turn to talk about disruptive threats. Without much ado, may I invite Honorable Minister of State for Home Affairs, Mr. Kiren Rijiju, to address this audience.
Thank you so much. Mr. Narendra Karmarkar ji, Madan Oberoi ji, Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad ji, and the Joint Secretary, Moderator, Santosh Jha ji, and learned members present on this evening. Actually, the subject on which we're going to discuss is so elaborate, and it's a very wide subject to really think about and to give your own opinion. And if I start speaking about the notes which I have, what the Ministry of Home Affairs has been doing, and it will become too academic, and I don't want to really make it into a reporting kind of a speech of what Government of India and Home Ministry is doing. But I would rather point out some of the issues, how we look at it, and quickly to understand that how Government of India is trying to face the challenges with regards to terrorism and cybersecurity. You must be realizing now that the incidents which the world is witnessing, especially in last decade, I personally feel that more and more voices coming around the world are sounding like the Indian voices. What we used to say a few decades back about the threat of terrorism, and the kind of response we used to get from our counterparts, we were never satisfied purely because we felt that our concerns were never understood. And sometimes we also say that to understand the real issue, you must feel it. Merely knowing the subject or knowing the incident is not enough. You must be able to feel it. And in a clear term, I should say that you must be inflicted with the pain to really understand the subject and to really understand the real threat terrorism poses. Now, wherever we go, we have understanding with various countries at multilateral level, at bilateral level. Counter-terrorism or sharing of intelligence becomes one of the very integral part of our understanding with any of our friendly countries. It has become so integral to how we look at the world. And when we talk about terrorism, the cyber security has become so much integral to understanding and to deal with terrorism. Now, presently, we are facing with these ISIS challenges. And many people put questions to the Home Ministry that, how are you dealing with this threat? How much India is really facing the threat of ISIS? And India being a large Muslim populated country, how should we handle the situation? And when we sit and analyze in the ministry and with various intelligence agencies, I feel that there's nothing to worry about, because Indian people have a strong character which is developed because of our ethical behavior. Just to make a point, when some of the youths have left India to join ISIS, in Syria, Levant, those areas. It is the parents and it is the Muslim society as large. They have been the instrumental in persuading them back to the mainstream. That means the Indian society has a strong feeling that violence has no space in our country. This is despite the numerous challenges we are facing. Because if you see the geopolitical location of India, then India is in a very, very critical location. And our borders are very porous. It's not very easy. As a minister looking after the border management, I always feel how to secure our border. It's very difficult. The fact is that we cannot have any kind of a border physical barrier or a fencing with Nepal. We do not have with Bhutan. We can't have with Myanmar. The only two countries we are having is with Bangladesh and Pakistan. That too, we know we have huge challenges. And with China, we cannot have border. So as a country, as porous as our border is, it's difficult to really comprehend how we are managing. But because of the character of the Indian society, we feel secured. And India abhors categorizing religion and terrorism together. We never do that. That is why when we are moving in terms of taking steps for counter-radicalization or for de-radicalization process, it is the senior citizens of the society. They come and they are the people who take much active role. And we have been very successful. Now to understand the cybersecurity, just to sound a little bit academic, now according to the Information Technology Act, cybersecurity means protecting information, equipment, devices, computer resource, communication device, and information stored therein from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction. So this is a very precise definition we have in our statute book. But if you see the challenges, today as a minister, I can, without any hesitation, share with you that sometimes I become and I feel helpless because we don't have boundary. The crimes are committed. Our youths are being influenced. Our security areas are being breached. But because of the nature of the cyber crime, you can't do anything. There are limitations and there are restrictions. And I feel that our senior security officers, they try to handle the situation as professionally possible as they want to, but we have limitation. That is why we are talking about collaboration, we are talking about working together. Every independent country on this planet must get together. Otherwise, how you control the cyberspace? It's not merely the question of technology, but it's much beyond. And when I was thinking of speaking here, initially I thought I should make a very technical speech, I should come with a very prepared speech, but with 10 minutes in hand, I thought rather I should just make very informal remarks and try to respond. If we are put forward with some questions, I should appropriately respond to your queries. But just to let you know a few of the important steps which is there in our mind and what we are doing in the Government of India. We have definitely have a policy with regards to our cyber security. We have already developed our national cyber security policy, which is already in place. And right now, we are considering the framework for enhancing our cyber security of Indian cyberspaces. And we have developed a multi-layered response, very in-depth. So we have categorized in 3 different compartments. The first is the NTRO, which would be responsible for the protection of identified critical information infrastructure. It will be basically those infrastructure which is with the government. And then secondly will be with the Ministry of Defense. So in the Ministry of Defense, primarily DRDO and the Defense Service, our MOS External Affairs himself was former Army Chief. So Army, our defense establishment, they have a very robust security system in place. They will be responsible for all defense-related cyber threats, vulnerability, detection and mitigation process. And the third is, we have kept it with the Department of Information Technology. They would be responsible for non-critical infrastructure and other critical information infrastructure which is not there with the NTRO. So that will be with the Ministry and the Department of Information Technology. So we have developed this structure, and the Home Ministry as a nodal ministry, we would be coordinating, we would be making efforts for better coordination between all different spheres. And besides that, we have, India has already developed our strategies. And this strategy will have so many agencies together, and Home Ministry again will be the nodal ministry, so that every ministry or every organization in the government, or to some extent with the private entities also, we can have some kind of a seamless coordination. We can come together and make everything very robust so that we can respond to the call of the time. And besides that, I would like to share with you this information about our data system. Now we are very much aware that the success story will depend on how much we share intelligence information with each organization. We have MAC at the national level, then we have a SMAC at the state level. So all our central intelligence agencies, along with the state agencies, and we do have intelligence branches of various organizations also, we need to have a seamless body. So NetGrid formula came, which most of you must be aware, and we also do get certain criticism also that we are not really taking forward the NetGrid as it was envisaged in the beginning of when it was conceived. I do admit that we should have progressed much faster. I also admit that we need to put in more resources also. Because no matter how robust each system or each body is, unless we connect them with each other for a seamless sharing of informations and for a proper coordination, we will never succeed. Because the passing and sharing of information is so critical to secure all the system in place. Otherwise, it will fail. And we have learned a lot of lessons also. No need to mention about the incidents and those unfortunate occasions where we had to really look back at those fault lines. Even the recent Pathankot incident, where there were huge discussion in the intellectual level also, that how this, despite having a proper intelligence inputs, in fact, very precise intelligence inputs which were there, still the incident took place. So there are certain things we do admit that we need to really get up and pull up our socks. But at the same time, you all know that it is such an area that every incident is different from the earlier one. We need to really learn lessons from each incident. And as this conference is being organized by the Gateway, our Gateway of India Dialogue, initiated by the Ministry of External Affairs, I feel we have a very strong international presence here. And it is a very appreciable job which the Ministry of External Affairs have done. And of course, partnering with our the Gateway group. I'm sure if I'm pronouncing the name right. And when I was told that this particular conference is going to have a very, very robust discussion, it may be a small gathering, but it will be getting together of the brains, which will be very useful in understanding the subject. So I ensure that I should come and spend some time with you. So as I said in the beginning, I do not intend to really make a very professional and very structured delivery of speech. So I thought I should just come and make few of remarks, then rather I should respond to the questions or the queries if you have any at the end of the discussion. And this Mumbai is really the gateway for many purposes, for many reasons. And to have this very important dialogue here in Mumbai is very meaningful also. And I'm happy that I could come here and spend some time with you. And I would rather listen more. I put myself in a listening mode rather than speaking out and talking much more than what I have just made a few of my remarks. And I once again thank the organizers for inviting me to speak here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. We began at 7:30 in the morning, so one must thank the audience to persist with us, all the experts that have come from outside India. Terrorism is not a new subject for India. It's something the city knows better than most. And quite easily, for us, it is the #1 threat that we have. But in recent times, beyond India, we see it taking new forms, which are not just malign, but brutal in nature, and even acquiring trappings of a state in the form of the ISIS that has emerged in the Middle East. From our perspective, we've been asserting the need for a unified global effort based on set norms and states being held accountable and responsible for taking action according to those norms and to abide by those norms. I think in case of terrorism, it is the state territory that is the most used medium for the terrorism to take root and flourish. And we've seen this across the border, but in other parts of the world as well. I wouldn't delve much on the terrorism issue because we have some experts here. Let me talk about the cyber domain, which is somewhat new and where the challenges are far greater in many ways, because I think the international discourse and also the national discourse is somewhat underdeveloped in this regard. What is the reason for this unique nature of challenge that we face in the cyber domain? I think the first one is the nature of internet itself and the nature of its evolution over the years. The anonymity that internet offers, the difficulty in attribution of perpetrators, and multiplicity of actors in cyber domain make cyber threats amongst the most difficult to respond to effectively. The absence of trust among governments, be it because of perception of relative dominance by one group of countries by the other, or differences in political systems and values, which complicates the issue and does not allow cooperation to develop at an international level. That ranges from sharing information to develop practices and best practices in trying to combat cyber threats. And that has meant that over a period of time, the threat has remained ahead of the evolution of countermeasures by the government and the larger private sector and the civil society. This is also true of terrorism, where collaboration among terrorists across the world is more cohesive today than among the states threatened by them. The third real challenging aspect of cyber is the absence of role of definition of actors in the cyberspace. We in India, while supporting the multi-stakeholder model for internet governance, were very clear in asserting that when it comes to national security threats in the cyber domain, the states have the primary and the paramount role to play. This is not to say that the private sector would not have a role, and that they have certainly a very important role in that. But the government, being particularly in our country, democratically elected and accountable to people, should take the primary leading role in that regard and coordinate with others, actors and stakeholders in the cyber domain. The other challenge that we have faced in the cyber domain is that there is a kind of a very diffused definition and delineation of various actors and stakeholders and what role they have to play. And this also goes back to the fact that over the years, the cyber domain has developed largely in the private sector with minimal intervention from the state. And it is felt that any sign of state beginning to play a role in this sector, particularly when it comes to cybersecurity, that it might actually impinge on that plank of development that has happened without much of the state involvement in the past. So, but our position in India has been that there would be, there's a merit in bringing greater clarity to the role of different stakeholders under the multi-stakeholder model of governance that we now support, which is the US-led multi-stakeholder model. And particularly the role of state in that regard is very important, because I think that would put to rest any misgivings that there might exist in terms of what kind of role state envisages for itself. Let me sort of stop here and request, we have, as I mentioned, we have more questions in the cyber and terrorism issue than there are answers around the world. But we have a very impressive panel of my colleague from here, Madan Oberoi. He's from Interpol. He's originally from the Indian Police Service. We have Dr. Narendra Karmarkar, who's one of the most renowned scientists in the country. And of course, Ambassador Khalilzad, who's been ambassador of the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan, and no better person to talk about the issue of terrorism. May I request you, Ambassador, to begin with terrorism? I think this resonates well with Indians, and I would be happy to listen to you.
I have to use this?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much, Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I want to thank the Gateway of India for its invitation for me to come here. The issue of terrorism is obviously an extremely important one, and addressing it requires international cooperation, as the Minister said, and particularly this is an area where there is room for significant cooperation between the United States and India, among others. I want to focus my remarks on two theaters with regard to terrorism, one the Middle East and the other South Asia, particularly the Afghanistan-Pakistan region. And in both theaters, although the roots and the complexities of terrorism, the different groups, different players are important, but I would like to focus, given the limited time available, on the state dimension of terror. And in the case of the Middle East, at the present time, the most significant manifestation of terror are a range of groups, the most important of which is the ISIS. That is the most potent, the largest, and the most brutal of the terrorist groups that operate in that region. And it is in part the result of two factors, its growth and it is support among a certain population in those areas. And those two dimensions are geopolitical rivalry between three major powers that are struggling for preeminence in that region. And those three are Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, particularly with regard to Syria and Iraq. Related to that, that this geopolitical rivalry among the three regional powers the rivalry has acquired a sectarian dimension between Shia and Sunni sects within Islam, and that the rivalry geopolitically has become intermingled with the sectarian tensions and fault line and conflict that has been at the root of Islam from nearly the beginning, but has acquired particular force, particular presence, particular resonance at the present time. ISIS is the successor in the case of Iraq to the Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which was defeated largely towards the end of 2008 or beginning of 2009, when a national unity government came to power in Iraq, and the Sunni Arabs who were feeling alienated were reintegrated. But with the disintegration of Syria as a result of the Arab Spring that started in North Africa, and with the withdrawal of US forces from Iraq, Iraq became a vacuum in which rival regional powers tried to fill the vacuum by pulling Iraq apart, and sectarianism and ethnic instruments were used by regional powers, the fault lines that existed to advance their agenda. In this struggle, as it continued with the Sunni Arab population of Iraq did poorly, and as a result, Al-Qaeda in Iraq was replaced by this current group ISIS, which already was beginning in Syria and came into Iraq. I believe that cooperation among the regional players and internationally in addressing the threat of ISIS is at some success. Clearly, territorially, ISIS' hold has reduced in recent months in both Syria and Iraq, but that there has been limits to that cooperation, particularly because not all members of the coalition have the same priority. For a number of states in the area, such as Saudi Arabia, the rivalry with Iran is the most important, and sometimes states such as Saudi Arabia and Turkey tolerate groups that otherwise would be called more extremist in order to block Iran's advance, as they see Iran making progress to acquire greater influence. Iran itself is using groups that are regarded internationally as terrorists in the struggle, such as Hezbollah and some of the other smaller groups. In my judgment, given the shortness of time, one requirement for addressing the issue of terrorism in that region in its current manifestation is an understanding, an agreement between these three major powers of the area. For without this, and particularly the use of extremist groups to advance geopolitical interests, is going to make this problem continue for some time to come. ISIS could be diminished and ultimately even defeated, as Al-Qaeda in Iraq was, but without addressing the roots of this problem, particularly the geopolitical roots of the problem, of the use of extremist and terrorist groups as instrument of policy, we will have another group with a different name, as we have ISIS replacing what I had to deal with when I was in Iraq, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So I think countries such as the United States and India, while we protect ourselves against the threat by taking measures at home, the wise policies that the minister explained that India is following, while we need to do that, at the same time, I believe we need to work together not only against the terrorist groups overseas that could pose a threat, but also to work towards a regional understanding, a mutual acceptance between Shias and Sunnis as equally valid sects of Islam, and an understanding, I have written about this in a recent book that I have published, a kind of a Neo-Westphalian agreement, if you like, as had happened between Catholics and Protestants after the 30 Years' War among these three players in the Middle East. And therefore, we need to game, if you like, what it will take to get from here to there, to get to an agreement. And I'm not signaling that this will be easy and can be achieved rather quickly, no. But a strategy to assist to get to that should be one of the main diplomatic long-term objectives that the rest of the world should have vis-a-vis this region, and it will have not only military dimensions, political dimensions, but also economic dimensions, since we have a business community here. And India, obviously, given its proximity, as the minister mentioned, and given that its power is going to grow, and its economic interests are going to increase in this region, it will have to play an increasing role as a partner with others, particularly the United States, to advance such an agenda in this region. In South Asia, and I'll conclude with that, it is clear that state sponsorship of terrorist group is a principal issue of terror. I experienced myself how in Afghanistan, when I was ambassador, the support by Pakistan to Al-Qaeda group, which had its base in Pakistan initially, and then to the Haqqani network, which has been regarded as a terrorist group by the United States, and to the Taliban groups, has been a source of continuing problem in stabilizing Afghanistan. It is very difficult to defeat an insurgency when it has a sanctuary where it can nourish, when it can sustain itself, where it can recover, where it can be trained, where it can be armed, where it can be financed. Makes the defeat of an insurgency much harder. And that has been a principal challenge for Afghanistan, and its stabilization, which could have a significant geopolitical effects in terms of Central Asia and South Asia. And these policies of Pakistan have not changed significantly, despite the effort that the United States and others have made to encourage Pakistan by using positive incentive assistance diplomatic pressure, diplomatic engagement, encouraging dialogue between Afghanistan and Pakistan have not produced result. And I believe that in order to be successful in the aftermath of the recent attack against Mullah Mansour, the leader of the Taliban, in Balochistan, it is vital that we confront this problem much more heads-on, and I believe that the international community, particularly the United States, but others also need to increase the pressure, both following the attack on Mullah Mansour, on similar attacks against other targets, but also by isolating Pakistan, both by suspending military assistance and economic assistance, not only bilateral between the United States and Pakistan, but also from the international community, such as IMF, so that Pakistan feels the pain that its continued support for state terror, that India has obviously has a lot of direct experience, including this city where we are, that if it doesn't change or adjust policy, it will become a second North Korea, isolated internationally, having a few nuclear weapons, dangerous as undesirable as that would be, but the world has no other option but to increase the pressure, to isolate it, and to confront it with the prospects of being a second North Korea. I know that Pakistan has played the game of playing US and China against each other in terms of gaining support, but it is my judgment that even Chinese have lost a degree of patience with the lack of cooperation that they see from Pakistan on the reconciliation or settlement in Afghanistan, or even in dealings with their own extremists. And I do not believe that it will be in China's interest to be dealing with another North Korea situation of a much bigger country on its border on the other side. And I hope that the current effort to increase pressure on Pakistan, which I believe the United States is doing in an unprecedented way, and the attack on Mullah Mansour was a strong signal that Pakistan will make the right adjustments in its policies. So I believe that both in the case of the Middle East and the case of South Asia and Pakistan in particular, this role of the states is a critical element. And I don't want to simplify to say there are no other dimensions. The complexities of technology, the role of networks, even individuals radicalizing themselves can do damage. But the state role, in my judgment, remains the most important and the most significant. And without addressing that, we're not going to succeed ultimately in dealing with this problem in this part of the world, as well as we should and we could. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. A very detailed presentation. I think there is the issue of conflicting signals that troubles us a bit on terrorism. It is hot and cold from time to time. Sometimes it is QCG, sometimes something else. So that is something that you might want to talk about later. And also the issue that I spoke about, that the absence of unified effort that we've been asking for, just because we can't define terrorists, is something that sounds inexplicable, particularly to this country, which has been a victim of terrorism without being an exporter of it, as Pakistan likes to say it is a victim of terrorism. But let me shift to Madan here, because I think terrorism and cyber are having an increasingly symbiotic relationship, breeding on each other. And of course, there is the issue of cybercrime, which is something that countries around the world are grappling with. There is the absence of trust that I referred to has led to great diffidence in being able to share electronic evidence, the issue of MLAT being very slow to respond to the kind of challenge that the cyber presents us, and the fact that the law enforcement agencies find it very difficult to cooperate with each other, while the hacktivists have no problems as such. So, Madan.
Thank you, sir. Let me start with painting a broad threat landscape which we are witnessing at Interpol with regard to cybercrime. So some of the broad trends which we are seeing are basically, we are seeing a lot of crimes like ransomware. Earlier, we was witnessing ransomware attacks on devices where devices got encrypted and ransoms were demanded for that. But a strange trend is now developing where critical infrastructure is being attacked by this. This year, in the beginning of this year, we saw in US hospital information infrastructure being attacked by ransomware, thereby endangering lives of many patients in the hospital. And a huge amount of ransom was demanded, and I believe it was paid to save the lives of patients there. So that is one broad trend which we are seeing. Then we are seeing attacks on financial sectors by groups like DD4BC, Distributed Denial of Service Attack for Bitcoins, who again are threatening to cripple the financial infrastructure and thereby demanding ransom to not launch a full-scale attack. We have also seen in last few months attacks on central banks. We saw attack on Bangladesh Bank. Heist of $81 million was done there. We have seen attack on Vietnam Bank and some other banks also in this region, especially related to SWIFT infrastructure, and this is another trend which is happening. And besides these broad trends where information infrastructure has been targeted, we are also seeing trends whereby traditional crimes are being used using cyber as a facilitator. And in this context, looking at the topic of this discussion, that is cybersecurity and terrorism, I like to illustrate the example of a report which we did at Interpol, how cyberspace can enable or facilitate a lone wolf kind of terrorist attack. And we studied what are the various components required for a terrorist attack and how these can be facilitated by cyberspace. So first of all, the easiest one which comes to everybody's mind is radicalization using social media, which is pretty simple to guess. The second one which we saw was a trend on darknet markets. So there are huge darknet markets which are selling small arms, and they claim to supply at any place in the world. And these are not just talk shops. We did a survey using our own forensic tools to see they were doing a lot of business there. Then there are marketplaces which are selling fake identities of any country, which include the passports, national identity cards, as well as utility bills, which are freely available on darknet markets. Then we saw sites like Slur, which sell secret designs of critical infrastructure. And these designs are available for a price, and these can be used to launch attacks in the physical space. We are also witnessing cyberspace enabling almost anonymous communication using services like Cygant or Telegram, thereby making very difficult for law enforcement agencies to cope with these challenges. And then it's not necessary for a terrorist or a criminal to be a cyber expert to do this, because all these services are available for a price. We have a rent a hacker kind of services where crime as a service model, as a business model is available, and all services are available for a price. And on top of that, we have almost anonymous cryptocurrencies to make payments, thereby leaving no trail on the cash trail also to follow for law enforcement agencies. So in light of these developments, we are seeing a huge challenging landscape for law enforcement to keep up with these kind of challenges. And the severe challenges which we are facing relate to, firstly, the capacity in terms of skill sets, capacity in terms of infrastructure, and capacity in terms of operating procedures to cope up with these challenges. And in regard to operating procedures, we are looking at operating procedures which improve interoperability in a multi-jurisdictional environment. Because despite best intentions, if there is no interoperability in procedures, the different jurisdictions would not be able to work and collaborate together. And Santosh just now mentioned about the trust issue, as well as issues relating to different pieces of puzzles lying with different stakeholders. So this is a major challenge which we are facing, because we believe that as far as cyberspace is concerned, both the skills as well as information lie outside the domain of law enforcement. So there's no option other than to work on a multi-stakeholder approach, and that too in a multi-jurisdictional mode. So in that context, we are at Interpol, we are developing models like Cyber Fusion Center, where we have embedded resources from some of the biggest technical companies. We have embedded resources from academia, including some of the professors who work with law enforcement teams to develop actionable intelligence, and leading to some of the very big operations, cybercrime operations across the world. Another challenge, which was also hinted earlier in terms of primacy of state being there. So cyberspace is one area where we are seeing what we can call as third-party policing. A large number of victims are not reporting to law enforcement the crimes which are happening to them. Probably they visualize what value can law enforcement add to that, what can I get out of law enforcement, which again points to a severe capacity constraint. But this is leading to a situation where many private sector companies are coming in picture, and they are doing investigations. And in order to bring consequences of on criminals, they are also resorting to what they call as active defense, which is nothing but what I call as encounter culture, because they assume the role of judge and the prosecutor and the investigator all rolled into one. But this points to a very serious trend whereby stakeholders without legal mandate are taking actions which they are not permitted to do. So these are broad challenges which we see from Interpol's point of view as of now.
Thank you, Madan. I think you raised a very important point about companies and non-state actors acquiring offensive capabilities and counter-attacking capabilities, which is something that normally doesn't happen in other areas. And the autonomy in the cyber sector cannot extend to this, so it should be a matter of worry for the governments across the world. And we're having this kind of a dialogue with a lot of countries. Let me shift to Dr. Karmarkar. He is the scientist on the panel and probably has all the solutions that science poses to us, the problems that the science poses to us in this regard.
Thank you. I also want to thank Gateway House for inviting me to bring a different perspective, a more scientific R&D perspective to this discussion. Now, a lot of focus has been there on threats, physical threats posed by terrorists and cyber crimes. But there are other ways, more subtle ways in which hackers and terrorists can disrupt how a civilized society works. And perhaps not enough attention has been drawn. So I want to point out kinds of things that are technically feasible to do. For, say, financial markets, we depend on trading on stock exchanges. Now, because of high-frequency trading or algorithmic trading, what it is called, it is possible for a well-supported, state-supported hacker group to essentially bring down and cause the stock market collapse artificially by simply the buyers and sellers may be the same group posing in different ways and supported by some state actor. And they can artificially manipulate stock market prices, creating a panic. Because when you see any large trading, like mutual fund, whoever is trading, they have some anticipation of what the price range may be, what to expect. They do their own research. And when you see something happening in the market that is counterintuitive and the prices are changing in some very unexpected ways, there is a tendency to think is that the market is smarter than me and the market has some wisdom and more and I don't have all the information, so I must be wrong. And this kind of thing creates a panic. And this can cause a market to collapse. So this can be engineered by artificially manipulating prices, and the group doesn't lose because they are buyers and sellers on the same side. I mean, they are essentially the same entity. So this, basically the terrorists, their modus operandi is to create a panic among people. Because if people never panic, the terrorists will never succeed. Is the panic, and people panic more when the money is involved. When somebody has his lifetime saving in the stock market and suddenly the prices go and he loses that is, you're hitting where it hurts the most. It's actually literally hitting below the belt because somebody's taking money from your pocket. And so this kind of thing can amplify, and that's what terrorist group looks for, is to amplify the panic. So stock market is a mechanism by which the trading, the high frequency trading, it can amplify. So this is a kind of very serious threat, and there is not enough attention maybe drawn to it. Now, to mitigate these kinds of attacks, the scientists who work in very advanced computer science, artificial intelligence, new algorithms, smart algorithms, supercomputers, the solutions are possible to put together for such a thing, but there has to be a focused effort to get these solutions. And it's possible to put together solutions. Now, to put together solutions would necessarily require international cooperation between multiple parties, because there is special hardware that you need, software, algorithms, coordination, the regulating bodies, and one also has to essentially build like a algorithmic, to control algorithmic trading, you need an algorithmic supervisor, which is a special computer system that supervises all the transactions that are going on. And it can sniff out any suspicious, malicious transactions, bring them to the attention of regulators. So these kinds of things are possible, but one would have to put together a system where one essentially has such a control system in each stock exchange, and all the world's major stock exchanges are networked together in the form of a computer network, where unless without that coordination, it cannot succeed. So you need cooperation, and technically such solutions are possible. Now, computers have become very sophisticated, and there is, in this economic area, there has been the economic theories, which are called game theories, 50, 60 years, and as concepts, and they have succeeded in qualitatively explaining many things. But now what is possible because of power of computers and algorithms, you can actually put them to use. And you know that computers are very, very good at playing games. Like you take a game of chess. No human being can now beat a computer, whether it's Vishwanathan Anand or Kasparov or anybody. That's because the computer takes such a comprehensive look at all possible board positions that you can't beat it. Now, so same thing applies even in the economic domain. So in case of an attack by a terrorist group, a computer can not only stop the attack, it can counter-attack in a way that somebody manipulating the prices actually loses by huge amount. So it's possible to do all these things, but one would need a consensus to actually take this thing seriously and build a system to mitigate such a thing.
Thank you. Of course, at some point we'd like to hear from you as to how the threat is going to grow as devices are going to grow over a period of time, something they refer to as Internet of Things. But let me come back to Ambassador. Let me ask you, get you out of the terrorism and bring you to the connect with the cyber. What do you think is the potential of terrorists using the cyber domain? They do use to spread radicalism around the world and get the attention of the faithful, as they say. But can they acquire capabilities which would enable them to cause such damage, unacceptable damage in future? Or whether you'd see them using cyber crime of the type Madan spoke about, such as ransomware or getting into the stock markets and interfering with it to raise finances. I mean, so you might have cyber financing rather than drug financing of terrorism in the future.
Well, thank you. Already, of course, the terrorists organizations, particularly ISIS, has used cyber as a way to spread its message, to recruit, to disrupt, and at the same time, individuals who are self-radicalized, living in the West, they use the internet to reach out to the main terrorist group overseas, to get direction and to become part of something bigger than just an individual activity, although pure lone wolf terrorist is also certainly a possibility. But even in that case, there is evidence that the inspiration, the radicalization, in part, perhaps comes out of what they learn in cybersphere. So we're already in this sphere, and it is a factor in the world of terror. Its role can increase because, as we heard, cyber is an extremely important weapon of disruption, number one, but it can also make destruction more effective when used in combination with a destructive weapon. And there is a huge potential, in my view, for facing a more complex and difficult set of circumstances, that we need, therefore, smart defenses, such as what was discussed here, as part of our defense arsenal. Cyber is a dimension or a sphere in which, in terms of dealing with the terrorist issue, we would ignore at our own peril.
I'd like to flag one more point here. In 2015, FATF Financial Action Task Force brought out a report in which they clearly identified how cryptocurrencies can be used for terrorist financing. So it is no more in the realm of speculation. There's models which are can be effectively employed for this.
Thank you. You referred to, Dr. Karmarkar, international cooperation. That is one dimension, of course, we'd like to hear from you as to how we can bring more international cooperation in dealing with the cyber threats. But there is another aspect that we often hear, and it's a very vital one in my opinion, which is that the private sector in India, how can it help with regard to working with the government in dealing with not just coordinating in terms of information sharing. There is this reticence that we hear that when they are attacked, they don't inform the government about it for the stock market fears. And also the fact that how, for example, can the government, using the private sector, working with the private sector, tapping into the talent in the private sector, go up the value chain in terms of cybersecurity product development, which naturally is useful to both. There is the critical internet infrastructure that the government primarily has to protect, but there's a lot of infrastructure that exists in the private sector that needs to be protected as well. So what do you have to say on that?
Let me first say the international cooperation part, because that's essential even if you bring in private sector. The private sector has many strengths in the sense that by implementing any complex system, they're faster in getting there, have more resources, they're more resourceful, can reach out and can make collaborations more easily than governments can. So they of course have a huge value to add. But at the same time, the governments have to lead, because this is the kind of thing I mentioned is going to support the regulators, market regulators. So it's essentially a function that a private entity can't take up. It has to be by government. Now, in terms of the international cooperation, there are many different skill sets available, not just people skills, the manufacturing and other skills worldwide. So if one were to build a very complex system, I could envision that you would do the chips, silicon chips required for that, maybe in US, you would make the motherboards in Taiwan, you would build the software in India, algorithmic talent is available in many different communities. So by cooperating in this manner, you would be able to bring the system to actually bear fruit much more easily than if any single entity were to try to do it. The other part is that, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Maybe the earlier part was difficult to understand, not because it is secret, you didn't hear it, or perhaps. The other part is that you do have to network all these kinds of computers together, because if you don't do that in isolation, they can't achieve the function. So the cooperation is required in that way also. Now, also if the computer actually succeeds in finding out malicious attempts, then to take any action on that, again, you would need support of intelligence, which has to be shared. So the cooperation is necessarily part of the game. It has to be there. Without it, it can't succeed. And if it's amazing that people who are trying to disrupt the society and not respect any rule of law, not respect even the common minimum human decency, they are able to cooperate, and people who want to go by the law, the businesses and governments, they get stuck on points that we should really just get over those and be willing to cooperate much more aggressively. So one also doesn't want to, another fact that I want to point out is a lot of things are known in the scientific world, but somehow there is some disconnect with the policy makers, with the decision makers. And when people are caught off guard, so, I mean, I would mention the kinds of things that WikiLeaks and Snowden did. Any advanced, somebody familiar with advanced computer science could have easily told this is possible. But the establishment woke up after the damage was done. And in that case, the damage was more of a nature of embarrassment rather than real damage. But in things like stock markets and financial infrastructure, the damage would be real. So it is, instead of waiting until something happens, it is better to be proactive in the cooperation and actually get a defensive system working.
Thank you. Madan, if I may ask, just to inform this audience that India has recently finalized a cyber framework agreement. During the visit of the Prime Minister, the fact sheet was issued, and there is a lot of work on capacity building, R&D, and working on law enforcement cooperation, etc. But there are clear hurdles that I referred initially about the MLAT processes, and there is also the need for the law enforcement agencies to be trained in capabilities that are required, and many of these capabilities might be best available in the private domain. So how do you build up this trust between the private sector and the government to begin to share data for law enforcement? How do you get help from that in terms of capacity building and training? And maybe if you can tell us something about cybersecurity product development as well.
Let me start with, I think there are three sub-questions here. One is the issue related to sharing of information, that is MLAT. Second is capacity. And third aspect is with regard to working with private sector. So our experience at Interpol has been that most of the time, the trust comes when we start speaking to each other, when we are working together, because the objective is not different for private sector as well as for law enforcement. All of us want to work to combat cybercrime, and we have instances where we are getting information which has been collected by Microsoft, which has been collected by banks like Barclays. We have information coming from Booz Allen. We have information coming from so many other private sector, and all that information is being shared. And when it is being shared, we have put in place a process whereby we can fuse different pieces of information, and we return the compiled picture to the source of information so that they can also take action on that. So it's a two-way street. If you just expect that the information will only come in and we will not share, then the model fails. So if we have this kind of a two-way process, the model succeeds, and we have some excellent pieces of work which have resulted out of that. Coming to capacity development, one of the major issues which is being felt by us is that in a multi-jurisdictional environment like relating to cybercrime, we cannot afford to have even one island of insufficient capacity across the globe. So it is not important to build capacity in one's own country, but most of the countries are realizing they have to build capacity all across the world, because otherwise that island of insufficient capacity would be used to launch attacks on them. So these are major issues. I think that we are running out of time, so I'll stop here.
Should we? Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. And ironically, we have more questions for this session than any other, so we'll try to rattle through as many as we can.
We can keep the lunch a little delayed. We can get more hungry.
So the first is directed to the Minister himself. Quite simply, what steps can be taken on the border security front which could help contain the cross-border terrorism-related issues, including infiltration, smuggling, etc.?
As I mentioned in the brief remark, that our border is very porous and as well as very difficult also. From all angles, I cannot explain because it's very complex. Since we are unable to really physically man the entire border, so we have gone to the technological solutions. We have adopted certain steps in recent time, especially in the Bangladesh and Pakistan side. So we have adequate manpower, but still we find it is not adequate. So we have lots of equipments in place now, and we are using it. As a pilot project, we have been successful in some of the portions. And in last 4 or 5 months as a minister in charge for the border management also, I have seen that there is a considerable decrease in the numbers of infiltration, especially in Jammu and Kashmir side. We have been managed to stop the infiltration in the last 6 months to a very great extent. And then we have, certain mechanism which we are exploring. Especially one side of the border is very difficult border, so we are looking out for some other mechanism also besides trying to make it a foolproof, because there are certain challenges which I may not be able to elaborate here, but we have certain challenges. We are trying to overcome it, but what I'm going to stress is that the technological solutions what we have adopted is proving to be very successful.
There is one more aspect, if I may add, which is the border roads, the infrastructure around the border, and that has been an area of emphasis over the last 2 years. So that might also help with security aspects as well.
See, regarding border roads, I remember when I was member of parliament in the opposition party, I was very critical on the government of India's policy about keeping the border area underdeveloped, which I always termed as a negative policy, that you have a defeatist mindset of not developing your border areas. Now every country wants to develop their border areas. In fact, in South Korea and in Israel, they make it as a tourist spot. They want people to come and see how they manage their border and see how it's being guarded, how this flag meeting and all take place, and also it's become a very interesting place. And that's what in India, in Wagah border, Atari border, thousands of people every day they come and see the flag meeting between India and Pakistan, that beating retreat. So I particularly focus on the infrastructure development in the border areas. That will take care of some of the concern.
Last question then for Ambassador Khalilzad. Do you think the adoption of an international convention on terrorism, perhaps under UN auspices, would lead to better collaboration and cooperation amongst states on terrorism? And just to add a very quick line on that, if that were to cover cyber at all, would there be an openness, do you think, to a multilateral approach from states, including India, to that?
If I may add, Ambassador, or if the CCIT is not possible, is there another way of dealing with it? Having a smaller group or building a coalition of like-minded partners?
I think that while it's desirable to seek a broad international agreement in both areas, I would not want to wait for cooperation among like-minded countries to start, and it's already started to become more effective and more meaningful, because sometimes while international comprehensive global international agreements are desirable, it will take time for everyone to share, to agree on the definition of the problem, what is terror and what's not. You know, some people have believed there are good terrorists and bad ones, and I think there are no good terrorists. They are all bad. But, while I think in the terrorism business, it would be desirable to get everyone to agree, but I think what we need urgently is cooperation among the effective, intensified cooperation among like-minded nations, like between the United States and India, for example. I know that we have a broad coalition against ISIS, for example, in the Middle East. But I know that although we in name have a very broad coalition, but inside that coalition there are very major differences as to where the emphasis should be and what should be the priority. So while I believe as an objective this is desirable, let's not mislead oneself to think that will solve the problem. While we work for that, we need to take the steps that I outlined. In the case of cyber dimension that's new, there may be room for more agreements, more rules and regulations that could have a broader mandate, an agreement. I would think there too, however, you have to be very smart in terms of your defenses, in terms of this government, civilian, and civil cooperation, in terms of countering, particularly in the area of terrorism. We face a huge challenge already. You mentioned its future. You know, there are issues of privacy, issues of industrial independence. We have had real problems countering this, but I think that's where I would put the emphasis while seeking as much broad agreement as possible.
Just to very briefly touch on the issue of the cyber and international framework on that, let me be very frank and say there's absolutely no prospects of any international framework on cyber emerging in the near future. And that was the reason for this being the absence of trust that I referred to in my opening remarks initially. So thank you for your patience and thank you for staying put here. We will, a good round of applause for our expert panelists and for the Minister.